The decline of our neighborhoods, it's been on my mind really strong this morning because in my old neighborhood, where my grandparents lived and I lived right next door to them, and I had the most amazing childhood and, about as safe as it gets, right? And a lot of people didn't lock their doors and all that stuff. And recently I had thought about buying my grandparents' old house back and maybe spending some time there. It's just a rental now, and I went to a lot of effort to put it together, and found out that the neighborhood has just gone all to hell. And it was pretty upsetting, to say the least, because I have such idyllic memories. It's hard to even talk about. I realize I'm more upset about this than I thought when I got on here. So bear with me. Just yesterday, something came up on social media on lockdown last night. Yeah, my grandparents' old neighborhood, a whole lockdown. Because there was this man making videos of himself, and he was brandishing and threatening to, and the police were everywhere, and they had the SWAT teams out on my little road that I grew up on. I have to pause this video. Okay, so I just cannot believe the decline in society. And, having watched it, I'm 66 years old, and, having watched this happen gradually and over the years, and how much things have changed, and not only how much things have changed, but how much people have changed, like dramatically, it's like their personalities have changed, like their whole DNA has changed. It's really weird. It's really upsetting, and I have my theories on some of why this could have happened, maybe the increases in, those things. I have seen it, I think I've seen it, a lot of it, but it's not just that. I think some of it's chemical, obviously. But I think some of it is so many of our kids have grown up in daycare. I think a lot of these kids that we're now seeing as adults just grew up not caring about other people. They didn't learn love. They didn't learn empathy. I think there's a lot of empathy missing, don't you? Do you notice it? And then heap it on social media. I think when we started seeing all this social media, we really saw a decline in people. People got nasty, got our keyboard warriors and everything. And then, yeah, I'm going to go a little conspiracy on you. And then what I think was happening is social engineering. I think that in so many ways we were pitted against each other I think men and women were pitted against each other, which is why dating has become next to impossible. I've seen, races pitted against each other. I've seen groups of all sorts, all politics. There's a hot topic. And it's like we've all been pitted against each other, but I do believe so much of it is social engineering. It's like we're easier to control, aren't we, when we're all against each other, fighting with each other. Humans can do some really mean things, and like this man that was broadcasting himself from a live Facebook last night while my old neighborhood was on lockdown for half the night. He was enjoying all the attention he was getting. This man was probably in his 50s, maybe close to 60. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing. I don't know. Old enough to know better. Back in 60s. And there was this really creepy thing that happened in that neighborhood at my grandparents' place. They had like a really small little farm, a couple of acres or whatever, and it was in a rural area. And they had a little barn, and my papa was an amazing carpenter. And I had, I used to write a lot. I still do. I enjoy writing. And my papa decided to build me a little writer's nook in the loft of the barn, because I used to play in the barn. I would take my tablets up there and write and stuff, So he did, and my grandma fixed it up really nice and put this homemade quilt on the floor as a rug, and I had a little desk, just this tiny little room, probably a 4x4, like size of a closet. But anyway, and I would jump up in there on the loft and go back in this little room, and I would take my dogs up there with me, And anyway, I was writing my stories, and I spent a lot of time out there by myself, and the barn was not that far from the house. It was pretty close, but it was kind of downhill a little bit out of sight from the house. Well, anyway, I went up in there one morning, and my quilt was all messed up. And I thought, that's weird. I didn't leave it that way. I always kept it really pretty and neat in there. I loved it. And so I didn't really say anything about it. I fixed it back. I wrote my stories that day. And anyway, I went back up there a couple of days later, and the quilt was all messed up again. And that time I told my grandparents about it, and they looked a little concerned. They were like, well, was it a raccoon or something, what? And they started checking around and found out there was a man who had been released from a mental institution, and he was hanging out in the neighborhood. He had become homeless since they had released him, and he apparently has taken up residence in my writing nook in the barn. At the time, I think they had found him and whatever, put him back where, somewhere where he wasn't hurting people or whatever. But last night as I was falling asleep, I was thinking about that man on the Facebook having the whole neighborhood locked down, and then I thought about that instance, this man in my writer's nook on my grandma's quilt. And I had this thought that none of us probably ever thought about, that maybe he left the quilt messed up because he heard me coming. Maybe he was up there when I was going out there and jumped off the loft. And what if he was in that barn while I was up there writing and singing and whatever, I didn't always have the dogs with me. I think the dogs would have alerted me, but I didn't always have the dogs with me, And I just felt this terror. It was like me, little Tammy, about 10 years old. I was just terrified last night, thinking about myself. Like, what if this man was sitting right under the loft? What if he was hiding in the hay bales? What if he was just out there, if he'd just been there when I got there? And I think there's a really good possibility that maybe he was. Because my grandparents never said anything about it, but they also weren't encouraging me to go out there and write anymore. It kind of became like, why don't you do this instead? When I think back on it, I was getting redirected and distracted a lot, and it was kind of like, oh, it's too hot out there today. Why don't you sit here at the picnic table in the backyard? Kind of thing. So I guess maybe the decline was happening there, and we didn't have social media. This guy wasn't able to get on social media and broadcast himself as some big victim like this guy did last night. I don't know. You never know. Mental health issues definitely exist, but they seem to exist more now than they used to, don't you think? That guy legit was released from a mental hospital, though. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure if it's worse now in that neighborhood than it was, or if we're just more aware of it because now we have Neighborhood Watch, and I'm really good friends with the Neighborhood Watch president there, childhood friend of mine, even though I live 2 hours away. So I know a lot more of what's happening there. Maybe then we didn't. Maybe we just didn't know. Ignorance was bliss then. I don't know. But one thing I do notice is when I go to like the grocery store where I see the general public, people people don't look right. And I'm not being judgmental about that. I'm saying, like, there's something wrong. I mean, you just see a lot of people that, how do I put this, because I know I'm gonna come across judgmental and y'all are gonna yell at me, and I'm truly not trying to go there. I'm trying to just make a point that people have changed, and you can see it visibly, you can hear it in how they talk and what they say and what they do and what they value. I don't know. You see where I'm going with this? Like, what's going on in our society, guys? I don't know. Maybe I've talked too long here. I don't know if I've made my point or what. I had some time to kind of think about it while I was making this long drive through the beautiful mountains today. And like I said, I'm on country roads, so I'm not too concerned about, and I do have on a seatbelt, so don't worry. I don't know what to do about it. I always say I wish I could roll back the clock to 1977, because it just seems like somewhere in the 80s things started to go off track, and then in the 90s it went off track big time. And then by the time we got to 2001, 9/11 and all that, really went off track. But I think for a while people got better. Did you notice that right after 9/11 happened, like, people seemed to join together more? They seemed to there was more camaraderie, than I'm seeing now. And then 2020 just busted it wide open. Forget camaraderie. I mean, everybody has been divided ever since, and I think so much of what we're seeing now, the inability to connect, or the inability to have friends, try to make friends, dating, I don't know. That one seems really impossible, and I'll probably end up making another video on that. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and I don't know where we're headed, guys. I don't know where we're